Good morning and welcome to IU Sports Sunday here in Bloomington. It's a beautiful sunny day, the day after graduation, which is crazy because time flies when you're having fun. We've certainly had a lot of fun in Bloomington this year. And I'll tell you who is probably not having fun and on the edge of their seats a little bit. Today is an important day in the postseason for one of the diamond sports, that of course being college softball. I was with IU softball earlier this week at the Big Ten tournament in West Lafayette. Nick Rotocap with you here on IU Sports Sunday this morning. I was filling in for Austin Platt and Alex Hines, the two voices of IU softball who both graduated yesterday. Congratulations to them and to all the IU graduates, by the way. A phenomenal accomplishment and one that's approaching for me far sooner than I'd like to admit. I was filling in for them as IU softball took on UCLA. And Indiana got to that quarterfinal game against UCLA by beating Washington in the opening round of the conference tournament. And Indiana entered the Big Ten tournament right on the bubble of the NCAA tournament. But after the team beat Washington, I could tell just from being around them, talking to the managers and the sport information staff with IU softball, you could tell that they felt pretty good. I overheard some conversations with head coach Shauna Stanton as well. It just seems like, okay, yeah, you beat Washington. Chances are you've done enough to show the committee that you belong in the NCAA tournament with an at-large bid. That was until there were bid stealers. And, of course, that's what all of those discussions are contingent on. But Indiana felt like they were pretty good, assuming say Oregon or UCLA won the Big Ten softball tournament, you kind of felt like, okay, that means there are going to be no bid stealers because one of those teams is going to be in the tournament anyway. But, well, that did not happen. There were bid stealers. One in the form of Michigan. Michigan softball, another team that was right on the NCAA tournament bubble. Well, they upset they upset Oregon first. Oregon was the number one overall seed. UCLA was the best team in the tournament. Michigan upset Oregon in the quarterfinal right after, or 2 games after Indiana, 1 game after Indiana played UCLA, because I remember we were walking out as Oregon was walking into the third base entrance, not knowing the fate that awaited them. Michigan upset the number 1 seed Oregon, so there's your bid stealer, making it further than Indiana did. Both teams were on the at-large bubble. And then Oregon makes it to the Big Ten championship and shuts out UCLA 2-0. So one bubble team wins the conference championship and steals the auto bid. Another bubble team loses in the quarterfinal to UCLA. Now, it wasn't that Indiana just rolled over. Indiana put up a great fight in that quarterfinal game against UCLA. Lost 5-4 on a walk-off infield hit, which was tough because Indiana had tied it in the 5th, but just could not break through and take the lead against UCLA, which, very few teams have even been able to do. UCLA has scored first in about 40 of their games and won 39 of those games. UCLA scored first against Indiana at Bittinger Stadium in West Lafayette in the Big Ten softball tournament on Wednesday. Indiana tied it in the 5th, but could not break through and take the lead. And ultimately, UCLA rallied, had runners on the corners with nobody out in the bottom of the 7th. And then Indiana walked the bases loaded, trying to set up the force play at home. Got a ground ball in the infield, but it was so weakly hit that Bree Copeland, Indiana's pitcher, in the circle for the second consecutive day, had to wait for it to come down. She saw the runner coming home and didn't come up cleanly with the ball. Even if she had, because the runners were off on contact, since the ball was hit on the ground, it would have been very tough for her to field it and make the play in time anyway. So that was how Indiana lost. Just a very tough way to lose, especially on a walk-off in a tournament setting. But that was how it went for Indiana. UCLA falling to Michigan, much like Oregon did. So Michigan was a bubble team again that steals that bid from Oregon or UCLA, one of the top 2 teams. Had Oregon or UCLA won the Big Ten tournament, it would have been pretty inconsequential because UCLA is going to be probably a top 10 national seed regardless of what happened in the Big Ten tournament, and Oregon is also probably going to host. Maybe not now, but they won the Big Ten regular season title, and I feel like that has to count for something as opposed to a conference tournament. So if you're Indiana, You were right on the bubble going in. You beat Washington. You won a game. But my concern for them is that Michigan did much more, and Michigan was in a similar situation, needing to do a little bit more. And the Big Ten softball tournament wasn't just chaotic either because of the bid-stealing Michigan Wolverines. Also chaotic because of the host school, Purdue. Their softball team made a heck of a run in West Lafayette at the conference tournament. They were the last team into the tournament after Indiana took 2 of 3 from them in the last week of the regular season, also in West Lafayette. Purdue entered the Big Ten tournament as the number 12 seed in a 12-team tournament. They upset 5th-seeded Northwestern on day 1, 4-2. And then on day 2, they didn't just beat number 4 Ohio State, who spent most of the year as a ranked team. Purdue beat the snot out of Ohio State. They beat them 14-6 in the nightcap on day 2. The second consecutive upset after Michigan shut out number 1 Oregon 5-0. So Purdue made it all the way to the Big Ten semifinal as the 12 seed in the Big Ten tournament, which, as much as I don't want to do, I think it's impressive. I think you got to give credit to Purdue because the Boilers, I wasn't expecting them to do anything. Obviously, I'm not the authoritative voice on college softball, but with the way that Indiana handled business against them, I just kind of figured, okay, they stole a game against Northwestern, but you can just chalk that up to the first round being weird sometimes. They probably won't get by Ohio State. And then, they didn't just get by Ohio State. They won by 8 runs, and that game was never close. Purdue then fell to Michigan 4-2 in the semifinal. Michigan beat UCLA as well in the championship game. But Purdue made a heck of a run. And, sometimes when you're the host school, we've seen what happens with Nebraska in the Big Ten baseball tournament most years. Home field advantage is a real thing. Especially when, I would say Purdue's opponent is far away, but Ohio State's not very far from West Lafayette. But Purdue made a run, and they're trying to make a case for an NCAA tournament at-large bid because they had a tough strength of schedule, and their RPI is tied for the best in program history at the end of the conference tournament. They had the second best strength of schedule in the Big Ten behind UCLA. But I don't know that it's enough because you barely squeaked into the conference tournament, and in all likelihood, if that's the case for you, you generally have to win your conference tournament and steal the bid, like Michigan did. And because Michigan stole the auto bid, I don't know that Purdue's going to get an at-large. If Purdue had made the Big Ten championship, they'd have a stronger case. But both of those teams, both Indiana and Purdue, will be holding their breath tonight at 7 when the NCAA tournament selection show airs on ESPN2. It is worth noting that Indiana got invited to the selection show. And I don't know if they'll still appear on it, but they did get invited. So I believe they'll be somewhere at Memorial Stadium. I don't know where. But that's where baseball was last year when they were on the selection shows. No, they weren't on the selection show, I don't think, because they were right on the bubble. But they got invited to the selection show after they beat Washington. And I think that's a good thing as far as Indiana's at-large chances. It may not even matter that they lost to UCLA and that Michigan won the whole thing. Maybe both teams get in and another team from another conference gets bumped out. But Indiana's chances definitely not as high as they probably could be or should be after Michigan did what they did in the Big Ten softball tournament. Moving to another conference, the SEC, which I don't think folks down there in the SEC like me very much after my remarks about the SEC and their favoritism in the eyes of college football national media and the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. I don't think they like me very much after what I said about that. But I don't like the SEC softball tournament very much because of how they handled their conference championship game. They issued an official statement on Saturday, saying, due to inclement weather now and predicted for the rest of the day, today's championship game will not be played. Both Oklahoma and Texas A&M are declared co-champions for the 2025 SEC softball tournament. Congratulations to the Sooners and the Aggies, and best of luck to both teams in the postseason. Thank you to Georgia for hosting a tremendous tournament all week. Commissioner Greg Sankey. The SEC canceled the softball championship game down in Athens, Georgia. and declared Oklahoma and Texas A&M co-tournament champions. I don't like that. I know that you like to have postseason play wrapped up the night before the selection show. But think about what the NCAA does with basketball. The men's selection show takes place right after the Big Ten championship game. Like the moment the final horn sounds, they go to the selection show. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's kind of a bang-bang thing. So why can't the SEC just play the softball championship game, say, this morning at 11 o'clock? Because the selection show is not until 7 o'clock Eastern. So why can you not play the SEC championship game? Even play it at like noon. Play it at 1 o'clock. I know it's Mother's Day, but you should declare an outright champion. You shouldn't declare a co-champion. You should play the game, right? And, it's one thing, obviously player safety is the most important priority. And A&M and Oklahoma, both shoe-ins for the NCAA tournament. That's not the question. You should play for a champion. The weather in Athens, Georgia is fine right now, and it will be fine until about 2 or 3 o'clock. There is a chance for rain later on in the day. Okay, play the game at 11. Softball games only take 2.5 hours at most. You go to extra innings, maybe it's 3 hours. So you start at 11. You have plenty of time to get the game in before rain chances increase later on in the day. And I don't like that Greg Sankey and the SEC decided to cancel that championship game. Because you work so hard all season long trying to lift a championship trophy, ultimately the national championship trophy, especially for a program like Oklahoma. But the SEC championship, I would like to think that means something. And I would imagine it means a lot to the players from both teams who worked so hard to get to that championship game. And then the commissioner just says, no, we could totally reschedule this for Sunday morning, but we're just going to cancel it. Both of you guys are champions, because now it feels like they're both losers. It's like a participation trophy, which I am not a fan of. I've never been a fan of participation trophies in sports. Unless you're like, I don't know. Well, I don't know. If you're 8 years old and you get a participation trophy, it teaches you that you get rewarded even if you don't win, which isn't the way the real world works. So I don't think I'm even a fan of participation trophies at that level. Certainly not in college softball or any college sport for that matter. I would be just as upset if the Big Ten decided to cancel the baseball championship game because, it's raining in Omaha. The selection show is on Memorial Day. And I know that travel considerations are a thing, but planes exist, and you could totally play the game on Monday morning. And the Big Ten, the baseball selection show is earlier in the afternoon than the softball selection show is. But you could totally play the Big Ten baseball tournament game on Monday morning and then move forward with the selection show at the conclusion of the game without moving the selection show, obviously, because it shouldn't be held up by one game. Also, if there are bid stealers, you would have to wait for the game to end. But if both teams are in, then you could just make it irrespective of the result of one game and consider perhaps the results of the 60 games that were played before the championship game. But I'm not a fan of Greg Sankey canceling the SEC championship softball game because participation trophies in college softball should not be a thing. I feel bad for Texas A&M and I feel bad for Oklahoma, the two teams who made it to the championship game, because they don't get a chance to fight it out and see who is the best team in the SEC tournament. So just unfortunate, because they could have rescheduled the game. They decided not to when it was totally possible, because, again, you have a window from right now until about 3 o'clock Eastern, maybe 4 o'clock Eastern, and the selection show does not take place until 7. So, Greg Sankey, once again, shame on you. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotacap with you. It's a great time to save at IU Credit Union. Go to IUCU.org to see their most current money market savings and certificate rates. Before the break, we were talking about the SEC softball tournament and how Greg Sankey is a moron for canceling the game and not playing it today. at, say, 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, or trying to crown a champion. Because, and they put this at the bottom of their statement, it just means more, right? If it just means more, then play the game. Because every other conference in both baseball and softball will play their championship games. So maybe the SEC, where it just means more, should play their championship game. I don't know. Maybe that's too far-fetched, because that requires critical thinking, and that's something that, as we learned during football season, a lot of people in the SEC are very bad at. So maybe I'm giving them a little too much credit, but I think that the SEC, if it just means more, they should have found a way to play the championship game. And I know that with the conference tournament championship, you obviously have things outside of just playing the game. You have travel, you have the TV window. My whole thought is play the game. Okay? Figure it out. That is where I will get off my soapbox. Shifting now to the gridiron, we've got, off the top of my head, 3 months plus 2 weeks until Indiana football takes on Old Dominion to open the 2025 season. Curtis Rourke has officially been signed by the San Francisco 49ers to a 4-year contract per San Francisco. So it's funny because 49ers fans are kind of confused and upset and disappointed because they don't like that the Niners drafted Curtis Rourke in the 7th round. They think that the Niners need to pay Brock Purdy, but Brock Purdy is going to make a lot of money. And my question is Curtis Rourke being used as leverage for the 49ers to try to pay Brock Purdy less? I think the answer is yes. But the Niners are trying to figure out how in the world to keep Purdy around because he went from being Mr. Irrelevant to bringing them to Super Bowl contention. And then Kyle Shanahan chokes away the Super Bowl whenever they get there. That's just kind of a given. But Curtis Rourke, there is a universe, and it is this universe, where he gives Brock Purdy quarterback competition. And I think that's pretty cool. If he can stay healthy, he should be a serviceable backup in the NFL for a while. And I personally think that's the best job in sports, the job of a backup quarterback. Because, you get to make money, you get an NFL paycheck, and if you have to enter a game, say because the starter gets hurt, there's no pressure. And if you succeed, then that's awesome. You can use that as leverage to make even more money. Just look at what Matt Flynn did. 5 touchdowns and 450-plus yards against the Seahawks in the last game of the regular season, playing for the Packers in 2011. And he parlayed that into like a $70 million contract with Seattle, even though he had no business getting that kind of money from any NFL team because he wasn't actually that good. So maybe Curtis Rourke has a Matt Flynn-like career and gets paid. I would love to see that. Because Lord knows, Michael Penix's starting job probably in jeopardy in Atlanta, just because the Falcons perennially underachieve and they're going to need a scapegoat. But obviously hoping the best for Penix as he enters his first full year as a starter. You want to talk about generational bag security. We'll talk about the guy who Penix replaced, Kirk Cousins, who, relative to what he has actually accomplished in his NFL career, has made way more money than he probably deserves. But Michael Penix, I'm assuming, will take over as QB1 in Atlanta for this season because that's what he was at the end of last year. I'm just hoping that he's not scapegoated by the Falcons when they evidently go 9-8 again. Because that's just what the Falcons do. We've had some interesting news come out also in the college football world about the academic progress rate report being released by the NCAA. And if you remember, a couple weeks back, I think it was, there was a program that lost bowl eligibility because its academic progress rate was so low. It was Akron. This news came out 4 days ago, so it's a little bit old, but I wanted to touch on it because it's relevant for the Big Ten as well. The Akron football team ineligible for postseason play this year, not just because of the academic progress rate for this year, but multiple preceding years as well. They had a score of 914. The minimum threshold for postseason eligibility is 930. Now, they haven't played in a bowl game since 2017, but the NCAA is finally enforcing APR penalties again post-COVID, which obviously hit in the spring of 2020. So now 5 years on, you figure enough time has passed, and Akron is the first domino to fall as far as postseason ineligibility is concerned. The last team that this happened to in the FBS was Idaho 11 years ago, and Idaho now isn't even in the FBS, which is unfortunate because I wanted to play in the Kibbe Dome in College Football 25, but unfortunately it did not happen. So shame on Akron for that, but hopefully they can get it figured out. I will say, though, that based on my experience with student-athletes in my classes, I wouldn't hold your breath. I just wouldn't. But we take a look at the Big Ten teams and their APR. At the bottom is Oregon, which is kind of surprising, I think. Oregon's academic progress rate, 946. Again, the minimum threshold is 930. So they're about as far above the threshold as Akron was below it. So Dan Lanning kind of gets your players in order, man. But Oregon did improve by 4 points compared to 2024. Which, again, that is kind of surprising. I don't exactly think of Oregon as a crazy, tough academic institution, but with the prestige of their athletic programs, you'd think they'd be a little bit better off the field. So, too, with number 17, Penn State. Penn State, 947 in the academic progress rate. Feels like, again, that's a little too close for comfort for a team that obviously is fighting for postseason football eligibility year in and year out. As my favorite program in the Big Ten that is always close but never close enough. As Mike Woodson would say, they can't get over the hump. Maryland is 16 because Maryland's not very good at anything except hating their basketball coach. And to be fair, if he ditched you for Villanova, I'd be pretty mad too. UCLA comes in at number 15. So, two former Pac-12 schools in the bottom four. Michigan State at 14. And that's interesting because the APR is actually used as a postseason tiebreaker. Obviously, sometimes you have more bowl slots than you have teams that have 6 or more wins. Michigan State was 5-7. And their academic progress rate being 14th in the Big Ten at 968 means that there's probably a team that, if there had been a tiebreaker, would have beaten them out because they had a better academic progress rate. So these things do matter. Illinois comes in at 13. Purdue at 12. For a school that's known for being filled with nerds, coming in at number 12 in the Big Ten's academic progress rate report. Feels like you should do a little better, especially if Indiana is above you, which, Purdue fans love to say that IU fans don't know anything or that Indiana doesn't teach anything, whatever. Purdue coming in at number 12. That's not a very good way to represent your university's academic arm. USC and Nebraska tied for 10th, so Indiana inside the top 10. Washington at number 8, tied with Rutgers at 978. Iowa at 982, tied with Indiana. This article from Badgers Wire saying, Indiana is now matching its strong academic standing with significant on-field results. Indiana dropping just 1 point between the final year of the Tom Allen era and the first year of the Curt Cignetti era. So this number is worth watching, as Badgers Wire writes, because Cignetti is bringing in a lot of transfers now. So if that number drops next year, that would be indicative, I think, more of the transfers coming in and changing the structure of the program, because Lord knows not a lot of players were transferring in to play under Tom Allen. That is not the case with Curt Cignetti, as we know. So that is something worth keeping an eye on over the next years. But yeah, these things do matter because, again, if you have 5 wins, then the APR is used as one of the bowl game tiebreakers, and then the team with the higher academic progress rate is the one that gets the bowl bid. Minnesota at 4 with 992. under PJ Fleck. Northwestern, no surprise at number 3. Michigan, again, no surprise at number 2. And Ohio State at number 1. They got a perfect score, 1,000 out of 1,000. So Ryan Day is going to have a lot to brag about at Big Ten Media Days in, let me check my notes here, Las Vegas, Nevada. What a joke. This July. Because not only did Ohio State obviously win the national championship, but they're the only school in the Big Ten with a perfect academic progress rate score. So Ryan Day, if you haven't already gotten a blank check from Ohio State, I would suspect there should be one in your mailbox soon. That is, if he hasn't had to move, because Ohio State fans post his address on Twitter every time he does something they don't like or every time he loses to Michigan. So they should be posting that again here in about 6 months. That's obviously not okay. Doxing is bad, and endangering Ryan Day's family is stupid. But that is how some Ohio State fans think it's best to cope with going 11-1 in the regular season. Here in Indiana, when Indiana went 11-1 in the regular season, I'm surprised the city of Bloomington didn't burn down. But good on Ohio State. Academic weapons, and obviously always a threat on the gridiron. It's something that Indiana is going to have to shore up if they want to beat teams like Ohio State. We'll talk about it next. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rodecap with you. I know I talked about this earlier, but there's some historical context that I forgot to add with respect to the SEC canceling the softball championship game in Athens, Georgia that was supposed to be played yesterday. I feel like they could play it today if they really wanted to, but it just means more. And apparently in this context, that means not playing a championship game between two teams that have earned the right to be there. If you remember back to 2008, and I'll be honest, I don't, because I was 4 years old when this game took place. The SEC men's basketball tournament in Atlanta was played. The first part of it was played at the Georgia Dome. And during a game between Alabama and Mississippi State, a tornado struck downtown Atlanta. You could see on the TV broadcast the wind shaking, I think, the speakers at the roof of the dome. It ended up doing damage to the roof of the dome. They had to move the rest of the games out of the Georgia Dome. That game between Alabama and Mississippi State went into overtime right as the tornado hit. Had the game ended in regulation, a lot of those fans would likely have been sent out into downtown Atlanta as a tornado was touching down. So the fact that that game went into overtime was the best thing that could have happened for anybody. The point is, though, that the SEC once played a tournament basketball game in a freaking tornado. But they didn't postpone, they canceled a softball tournament championship because of rain. At one time, it just meant more, but it does not just mean more anymore. Now, in hindsight, if you could have stopped the game, you would have. But they didn't know that a tornado was touching down inside the Georgia Dome at the time, obviously. In 2008, the spread of information took place a lot slower. It's not like somebody was a fan was going to leave, look outside. Oh my goodness, guys, there's a tornado. Everybody shelter, That's not how it would have worked. And you're not really considering the weather when you're playing a basketball game. So I know that it's apples and oranges, but the SEC once played a basketball game in a tornado. But they decided that it was a little too much to play a softball game a day later. Just unfortunate. Unfortunate because now it gives us another reason to laugh at the SEC. Although, is that unfortunate? I don't really know. I don't think it is. I don't think it is at all. Indiana football, we mentioned that they're going to need to shore up one particular part of its roster if they're looking to hang with the big boys of college football this year and in future years. That, of course, is the offensive line. I remember, because I was there, the way that Ohio State just took Indiana's lunch money up front. And then similarly, Notre Dame took Indiana's lunch money up front in those two big games for Indiana football last year. And Curt Cignetti thinks that Indiana's offensive line can be better than last year. So Indiana obviously getting some key transfers up front. Khalil Benson, who did not see much, if any, action this spring, comes back after spending time at Colorado. Zen Michalski comes over from Ohio State, and Pat Coogan takes over at center. He comes over from Notre Dame. Bob Bostad, Cignetti calls him a great offensive line coach. He's always been very complimentary of Bob Bostad, which it makes sense because Bostad was the one Tom Allen assistant who Cignetti kept. So Indiana had 4 returners on the offensive line last year. But again, struggled against Ohio State and Notre Dame. Indiana couldn't run the ball in either of those games. They averaged just 2.2 yards per carry in those two games. Allowed 8 combined sacks, 5 against Ohio State, 3 against Notre Dame. The 5 against Ohio State, it felt like Ohio State was in the backfield the moment Curtis Rourke snapped the ball. Like, he catches the snap and he's on the ground. It really felt like it happened that fast because at times I think there were times when it happened that fast. Carter Smith at left tackle will be Fernando Mendoza's blindside blocker this year. Curt Cignetti describes him as an all-conference caliber player, and he's still got 2 years of eligibility left. And then continues saying that, he shouldn't have mentioned his eligibility because other schools might want to lure him away. Which, if other schools want your players, that's actually a good problem to have, just like if other schools want your coaches. Also, Bray Lynch and Drew Evans comes back. The loss of Drew Evans was particularly big for Indiana last year. The program announced before the Michigan game that Evans tore his Achilles in practice and was out for the rest of the year. So you could tell after that Michigan game, again, Ohio State and Notre Dame were both after Drew Evans tore his Achilles. His loss was felt for Indiana football last year. Now, coming off a torn Achilles, obviously, is tough, and you never want to rush back. So I would assume, I do not know this for sure, but I would assume that Drew Evans will probably not begin the season for Indiana just because, again, you never want to rush back from a torn Achilles. And that Michigan game took place in early November. So I don't know if he'll be back until October, maybe even November. I don't know. But having Drew Evans back at some point next year will be huge for Indiana. Bray Lynch also coming back for Indiana, another returner at guard on the Indiana offensive line. Likely staying there, according to Cignetti, as Pat Coogan takes over at center. Coogan, number 4 interior offensive lineman in the portal last year, started late in the year for Notre Dame at center, and then Zen Michalski comes over from Ohio State. Khalil Benson, who started for Indiana at right tackle 2 years ago. They have depth. And he said that he likes the offensive line a lot. Obviously, there are still some questions as to how Indiana is going to construct the offensive line on a position-by-position basis, but the pieces are there, and Cignetti likes it. Obviously, the offensive line, very poor in the recent past for Indiana. Seemed like that was a huge reason why Michael Penix could never stay healthy, just because he was getting beaten up so much. So Indiana looking to turn what has historically been its biggest weakness into one of its biggest strengths, and it's one that they're going to need. Obviously, Curtis Rourke last year not being very mobile on account of, as we know now, playing with a torn ACL, which is why he was wearing that big knee brace. Couldn't really improvise much when the pocket broke down, and as we mentioned, late in the season, it broke down a lot. Indiana also couldn't run the ball a lot late in the year because, again, they were not strong up front. I would expect Fernando Mendoza to be able to improvise a little bit more, but he did take a lot of sacks at Cal, and that was kind of one of the bugaboos with him. A lot of those were because of a weak offensive line. But also, Indiana's running game will look completely different this year, given that both Justice Ellison and Tyson Lawton are gone now. You'll see some combination of Lee Beebe Jr., Roman Hemby, and a player to be named later who slips my mind. And it's embarrassing that he slips my mind. But Indiana has options at running back. A bunch of new faces entering the fold. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you. I was going to talk about something else, basketball related, but I saw a video from On3's Hayes Fawcett on Twitter. That's just so weird. On3 covers college recruiting. Hayes Fawcett is one of their reporters. And Oregon landed a commitment from edge rusher Richard Wesley in the class of 2026, described as elite by On3. So for this commitment video, Wesley is hanging out at a pool, and he's talking about how there are schools that showed him lots of love, but only one school showed him a certain kind of love. The camera pans over. Again, they're at like a swimming pool. And there's a TV in the background across on the other side of the pool that's playing, for some reason, Jordan Travis highlights from like the ACC Digital Network YouTube channel. Keep in mind, this kid is committing to Oregon. Definitely not an SEC, or just, excuse me, definitely not an ACC school, at least not yet. Oregon, famously associated with the ACC. So Jordan Travis highlights are playing in the background. This kid's talking about how he's only seen a certain type of love from one school. The camera pans over to the left side. Dan Lanning shows up in an Oregon hoodie, or in an Oregon long sleeve shirt. Says, "It's time, baby." And then the two of them take their shirts off and jump into the pool together and make an Oregon O. If you remember back to 2023, the first year of the Deion Sanders era at Colorado, Lanning got a lot of notoriety for his locker room speech before the game. Oregon hosted Colorado and beat the snot out of them on national television. It was incredibly embarrassing for Colorado. Oregon head coach Dan Lanning said in the locker room, "They're playing for clicks. We're playing for wins." Deion Sanders has said and done a lot of interesting stuff, but I don't think he's ever announced a recruit's commitment by taking his shirt off and jumping into a swimming pool with them while highlights from a completely unrelated quarterback play in the background. That is just weird. From a coach, again, who less than 2 seasons ago criticized another program for playing for clicks instead of wins. Now, they did back that up with their on-field play, did Oregon. But that is an incredibly tone-deaf thing to do for Dan Lanning, let alone the fact that you're jumping shirtless into a pool with a high school recruit who just finished his junior year as a college head coach. That's a little weird. That's weird. I have nothing else to say about that. I think it's weird. Also, probably should have changed it to like Bo Nix highlights, or like, I don't know, not Jordan Travis highlights. So just something very weird. Again, I talked about how I was surprised that Oregon was last in the Big Ten's academic progress rate report. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised. Maybe it's just that they're all bark, no bite, because they have, again, 700 different uniform combinations, but the moment they play on a big stage, like against Ohio State in the Rose Bowl, they lay down and die. And their mascot comes to Bloomington before the start of this football season and completely disrespects Heps Rock outside Memorial Stadium because they don't know the history of the conference they joined. So maybe I'm not surprised that Lanning did something that was that tone deaf. But nonetheless, jumping shirtless into a pool with a 17-year-old, that's a little weird for Dan Lanning. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you. On this second Sunday in Bloomington, we have a statement from Indiana head coach, now departed Indiana head coach, now ex-Indiana head coach Mike Woodson. He issued a statement on Twitter a couple days back talking about his time at Indiana men's basketball. He says, quote, "Coming home to lead Indiana men's basketball was an honor. It was a great opportunity to represent the program that helped shape my college career, and I'm deeply grateful for the full circle journey back to Indiana. Thank you to the fans for your support through the ups and downs, my players, my dedicated coaching staff, team managers, the IU professors who guided our young men off the court, the medical staff and trainers who kept us healthy, and the strength coaches who challenged us daily. To my wife, Terry, our daughters, Mariah and Alexis, your love and support have made this journey worthwhile. To my family and friends, thank you for giving me the strength to continue building my vision while staying grounded. Coming back to my alma mater to coach brought me fulfillment. I'm proud to watch the young men I've coached transition into gentlemen on and off the court. I want them to know how proud I am of them. Our journeys will continue, and I'll always be here for them. Mike Woodson. That is Mike Woodson's statement on his time at Indiana, released a couple days back on social media. And yeah, I think that's most IU fans are generally supportive of him, at least from what I saw, which is a good thing. Just unfortunate that the tenure didn't really work out as well as I think a lot of people were kind of hoping. It's something where you look at the resources that Indiana had, the financial backing, the fan support that Indiana had in this era of NIL, you'd think Indiana would have been better equipped to compete at a higher level. Unfortunately, that just didn't happen. So hopefully we're not seeing another one of those statements in 3 or 4 years from Darren DeVries, because Indiana basketball, as we've talked about this, and it's been very well documented, I would say, throughout the last handful of years, the last decade or so. Indiana basketball might just be broken. I don't know. It certainly has not been successful in a very long time. But again, hopefully we go a long time without seeing one of those statements again from an Indiana head coach. Shifting now to the Diamond, the other Diamond. We talked about softball at the top of the first hour. But again, Greg Sankey, shame on you for canceling the SEC softball championship because of rain. Your conference played a basketball game in a tornado about 17 years ago. But you can't postpone a softball game by a few hours because of rain. Just comedy, honestly. Comedy. Not comical is the state of Indiana baseball right now. They have officially played 50 games, which means they've only got a handful of games left in the regular season. Game number 51 is today at 4 p.m., which is a weird start time on a Sunday. Indiana takes on Purdue in the series finale. The first two games of this series being played on Friday night and Saturday afternoon. Both pitchers' duels. Indiana took the series opener by a final score of 8-0. Ryan Kraft, in his final start at Bart Kaufman Field, had a career-best day. And it was a day that's been a long time coming for him, if you know the story of Ryan Kraft. But if you don't, and that's okay if you don't, I will give you the Cliff Notes as best I can. Nick Rotacap here with you on IU Sports Sunday. I've covered IU baseball for 3 years. So I was a freshman covering the team my first year when Ryan Kraft had his best full season at Indiana. First team All Big Ten honors in 2023. But he has taken his lumps throughout his career. Kraft's freshman season was one that was characterized not just by growing pains for him, but for Indiana as a team. There were a lot of true freshmen that got a lot of playing time for Indiana. Kraft was among those freshmen. He pitched 42 1/3 innings, the most by a freshman reliever in IU program history. But he allowed 46 earned runs, an ERA of nearly 10 for Kraft. He took his lumps his freshman season. Jeff Mercer talks about him saying that he's always been in the fight. Indiana just kept running him out there. He kept taking his lumps, but he was always competing. And, you know, Kraft did what many college baseball players do after their seasons are done with their schools, and he joined a summer team. So Kraft spent the summer after his freshman year with the Kingsport Axemen of the Appalachian League, which shout out to the Appalachian League because that's where I'll be spending my summer. So nice little crossover there. But Kraft did great with the Axemen. 4-0 in 5 starts with a 1.73 ERA. The Axemen won their first and, to this date, only Appalachian League championship. And Kraft was a key part of why. Kraft then came back to Bloomington for 2023, which was my freshman year, my first year covering the team. And he was a first-team All-Big Ten reliever, but he was kind of a Swiss Army knife for Indiana baseball. That pitching staff was loaded. You had future MLB draftees like Luke Sennard, Connor Foley, Craig Yoho, all of whom had massive impacts, and so too did Kraft. Kraft was fantastic in his sophomore season, a 2.48 ERA and 61 2/3 innings, 6 wins to 1 loss, and 5 saves as well, which really kind of reflects, and again, I talk about how pitching wins and losses aren't really useful, but 6-1 with 5 saves, it tells you that he was good in all sorts of situations, and that's what he was in 2023. That young core that went through a lot of growing pains in year 1 began to mature, and mature quite fast in year 2, because Jeff Mercer plays his young guys a lot from day 1. That's always been his philosophy at Indiana. In 2023, those young guys were really, really good. Kraft was among those. Mercer called that season, the 2023 season, magical for Ryan Kraft. And it was primarily a 2-pitch mix for him, for the Indiana left-hander in his sophomore season. An elevated sinker and a cutter. And usually you don't think of sinkers as being a pitch that you'd like to elevate, but that was what worked for Kraft. And going into 2024, a lot of people, myself included, were very high on Ryan Kraft. We're thinking, okay, this guy was a shutdown reliever who could give you a spot start last year. There's no reason to think that he can't do it again. He maybe could even turn into a full-time starter in 2024, because Luke Sennard, who was Indiana's Saturday starter in 2023, suffered an elbow injury at the end of the season. He had Tommy John surgery and was out for all of 2024. So they needed somebody to carry that torch, and a lot of people, myself included, thought that might be Ryan Kraft. He started the season opener against Duke, but struggled out the gate. Only won an inning in the third, gave up a pair of home runs, 4 runs in total, and just got just 4 outs. And that was something that was indicative, as it turned out, of what was to come for Indiana in 2024. Ryan Kraft struggled a lot. So too did the rest of the Indiana pitching staff last year. They found their groove in the final month as a unit, but Kraft never did. He never settled in 2024. His ERA increased by nearly a factor of 3 compared to 2023, and his innings output decreased nearly by a factor of 3. Just 26 innings and an ERA of 7.27, but perhaps most concerning was that with the same 2-pitch mix that worked so well for him in 2023, his home runs per 9 increased nearly tenfold, from 0.3 in 2023 to 2.8 in 2024. He was using the same 2-pitch mix. Talked about the elevated sinker and the cutter for Ryan Kraft. First team All-Big Ten honors in 2023, 7+ ERA, relegated to a low-leverage role in 2024. And, it's not exactly rocket science to figure out why. Jeff Mercer talked about it, the Indiana baseball head coach, saying once you throw 70 innings of the same pitch sequences, people get a feel for it. The stuff didn't move the same last year as well. So Indiana bows out in 2024, blown out in back-to-back games at the Knoxville Regional. Kraft really only pitched in a low-leverage spot against Tennessee after that game was well out of hand. So then Kraft, much like he did in 2022, goes back to a summer team. This time, he goes to the Kalamazoo Growlers of the Northwoods League. Shout out Ian Unsworth. He was their broadcaster back in 2022, now working for the Hub City Spartanburgers. So he's well-versed in the Kalamazoo Growlers. Kraft goes up there, and he's probably searching for answers around this time last year when he was just about to join Kalamazoo. But anybody in his spot would have, because Ryan Kraft was a guy who, again, went from nearly being unhittable in 2023 to being relegated to what was essentially a mop-up role by the end of the 2024 season. And he had a mountain of work in front of him to get back to the form that he once had. So Jeff Mercer tasks him with diversifying his arsenal. In 2022, he got hit hard, but he had kind of a 4-pitch mix: sinker, cutter, curveball, changeup. So Mercer says, okay, go back to something like that, see if you can make it work. And I want you to go back to that slow curveball that you threw during your freshman season. And that was exactly what worked for Ryan Kraft in the Northwoods League, 2024 with the Kalamazoo Growlers. 56 and a third, 6-2 record, and a 1.44 ERA, including 2 complete games. The Growlers, again, much like Kingsport did when Kraft pitched for them 2 years prior, won their second ever league championship, or their second league championship in 3 years, did the Growlers, I should say. And Kraft was named the Northwoods League Pitcher of the Year. He was the best pitcher in that league. And yes, it's a wood bat league, but still, a 1.4 ERA, 6-2 record, and 56 and a third. Impressive. Jeff Mercer said that summer was huge for Ryan Kraft to get out there and execute 4 pitches, and that's hard to do. You don't find many pitchers in the Big Ten who can throw 4 pitches for strikes, but Ryan Kraft turned into one of those pitchers. So he comes back to Bloomington this past fall, I should say. And it was the most success he had on a mound in a season with IU or with a summer team since high school. Mercer talked to us about this earlier in the year. He got leaner, did Ryan Kraft, which allowed him to get on top of his pitches better, as he did 2 seasons ago. And that's important. In baseball, you can have good pitch profiles, but if it's not coming out at the right arm angle, and we're talking about very minute adjustments here because that's the nature of baseball, if you don't get on top of the ball enough with a sinker, it's going to run more side to side. And when it runs side to side, especially if you're a lefty, that runs right into the barrel of most right-handed hitters. Or if you're going left on left, you're trying to run that sinker in, but it just moves laterally and it doesn't drop. You're not going to have success. So Kraft gets on top of the ball. He leans out. That gives the sinker more life, and he started mixing in that slow curveball. Kraft's sinker, high 80s, low 90s on occasion. The curveball in the low 70s. So we're talking about a differential between 15 and 20 miles an hour. And for hitters, even in college, it's very difficult to start, stop, and then start again. That's what makes Kraft so effective. He worked really, really hard. And he still struggled through the first month of the season. 5 appearances, 9 2/3 innings, and an 8.3 ERA for Ryan Kraft, which in the first month of this season, again, college baseball is as hitter-friendly as it's ever been. You're going from wood bats to metal bats, generally smaller parks, more experienced hitters, and it just didn't work yet. But he kept working. After never going more than 3 innings in his first 5 outings, during which he had an ERA of nearly 8.5, Indiana went out to UCLA, and Ryan Kraft got the start on Friday night. UCLA is a team that is now in contention to host a regional as one of the top 16 teams in college baseball. UCLA is really good. And Ryan Kraft went out there while the rest of us were on spring break, and he pitched really well for Indiana. 4 1/3 scoreless while allowing just 2 hits. To that point, it was his longest out of the season. And I saw that outing, and I may have talked about it on this show, about how maybe it was a fluke, but also maybe something clicked. Maybe something clicked for Ryan Kraft. It was his longest outing without allowing an earned run in nearly 2 years. It was his first appearance since 2023 where he had gone longer than 4 innings and not allowed an earned run. And he proved it wasn't a fluke. He kept stacking good outings. He kept taking the ball, doing what he did for Indiana 2 years ago, just taking the ball whenever he needed. There was no set role for him. He would get a spot start in a midweek. He'd come in out of the bullpen late in games to try to shut the door. He would do whatever he was asked to do, did Ryan Kraft. As a senior, as one of the leaders of the pitching staff, setting the example for the younger guys. And he stacked good outings. And as the season went on for Ryan Kraft, his ERA kept dropping. Under 5 in early April after being above 8 in mid-March. Under 5 in early April and under 4 by the end of the month after he went to Iowa and delivered 3 1/3 shutout innings. Now, Indiana got swept at Iowa, but it wasn't Ryan Kraft's fault. And the retooled pitch arsenal was the reason for it. But he was still missing something, was Ryan Kraft. In 2023, he had a signature outing against Northwestern. Coincidentally, it was around this time, the first full weekend of May in 2023. May 6, 2023, 7 1/3, 4 hits, no runs, no earned runs. He allowed 1 unearned run. 4 hits, no earned runs, 7 strikeouts. Season highs in innings pitched, 7 1/3, and 7 strikeouts. This season, he didn't go 6 innings until last weekend at Abilene Christian. He went 6 full, but also gave up 4 earned, which was a season high. So Purdue comes to town this weekend, and Kraft is making his final start at Bart Kaufman Field. He has appeared in as many games as nearly any pitcher in IU program history, but he still, this year, does not have that signature start. And that was until Friday night. Kraft took the mound for his final start at Bart Kauffman Field. After not getting to face Purdue last year, Indiana took 2 of 3 in West Lafayette. Ryan Kraft didn't step on the mound in a game once because by that point in the season, again, he was relegated to a low-leverage role because he just did not have it. And this is a guy who was Indiana's best reliever the year before, not pitching against their biggest rival a year later. But the last time Purdue came to Bloomington was 2023. Kraft, 5 innings, 2 runs. So the blueprint was there. And he did even better than that outing on Friday night. Nearly 2,500 fans, which is a capacity crowd at Bart Kauffman. Kraft goes 7 efficient shutout innings. He gave up 5 hits and stranded a base runner in every single inning except the 6th. But he was extremely efficient, and he did what Jeff Mercer has talked about Indiana pitchers needing to do all season long, managing the game. He got a lot of weak contact thanks to that sinker curveball mix. He got 3 strikeouts early in the game, all of which came on that curveball, which, again, he just started throwing again in the Northwoods League this past summer. That slow, they called it a Bugs Bunny curveball. On Friday night, Indiana shut out Purdue baseball for the first time since 2014. And if you're wondering, that game, May 2nd, 2014, Kyle Schwarber, 4 for 5 with an RBI. And Mercer talked about Kraft after the game. 7 shutout innings, his best start in 2 years, one of his best outings of his career. And Mercer talks about what a career transformation Kraft has had. Called him the consummate pitcher. And it was 2 years and 3 days after he had that outing at Northwestern. 7 1/3, 1 run, no earned runs, 7 strikeouts. This time, 7 innings, no runs, 5 hits. Just 4 strikeouts, but he was efficient. He only needed 85 pitches. And Kraft looks like he's regained that form. So he's a guy who's been described as one of the most reliable pitchers in program history. And he's going to need to continue to be that reliable. And even then, let's be honest, Indiana lost to Purdue yesterday. So both teams are going for the series today. Indiana right now is 28-22. Barring a run in the Big Ten tournament, they're not making it to the NCAA tournament, unfortunately. This is a team that had aspirations of hosting a regional this past year when the season began, and it just has not gone according to plan. But the career arc of Ryan Kraft is one that I've been following closely for 3 years. Kraft wrapping up his career at Indiana, and the way that he has persevered through adversity. I don't know that he's going to play professional baseball. But, I think as a lefty, he might get a shot. I don't know. Like, Mercer talked about it himself this weekend, Indiana's head coach, talking about how it's not one individual pitch that is great for Kraft. It's his combination of pitches and the way that he uses them. The sequencing that sets him apart. And the numbers, again, his ERA 3.5, actually pretty good for college baseball. You look at it as someone who maybe only follows Major League Baseball and you think it's pretty average, but a 3.5 ERA in college baseball is actually really good. I hope he gets a shot to play professional baseball, but if he doesn't, that work ethic, that perseverance, somebody who, again, went from getting knocked around like crazy his first year of college ball, first team All-Big Ten, and then can't repeat it the next year, it'd be very easy to transfer out, give up, fold, think that you can't do it. And Kraft struggled for the first few outings this year, and then something clicked when they went out west. And I would say he painted his magnum opus against Purdue on Friday night. It was great to watch because Purdue's hitters had no answers for his pitch mix, relying heavily on the sinker and the curveball. They were way out in front every time they made contact with the curveball. He gave up some hits. He gave up 5 hits in 7 innings, which, still some traffic on the base paths to contend with, but he managed it. He did everything that you're supposed to do as a pitcher because it's not going to go perfectly. But Kraft did a fantastic job. And as someone who's, we've interviewed him a lot because he's one of the veterans of this program, he got the loudest ovation of anyone on senior day, and it was very well deserved. So good on Ryan Kraft. beating Purdue, first of all, because that's always good. But the way that he did it, the amount of work and the amount of struggles it took him to get to that moment cannot be overstated. So good on Ryan Kraft. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you. On this second Sunday in Bloomington, as good a time as any to remind you that it's a great time to save at IU Credit Union. Go to IUCU.org to see their most current money market savings and certificate rates. So the NFL draft has come and gone. And somebody filed, I can't believe this is real. Somebody filed a $100 million lawsuit against the NFL. And I'm not making this up, because Shedeur Sanders fell to day 3 of the draft. That's comedy. I wonder if this fan, I use air quotes, goes by the name of Kel Miper, definitely not Mel Kiper, the ESPN draft analyst, who was, I would say, having a full-blown meltdown because Shedeur slid so far during the draft. And this is a guy who Mel Kiper was going on and on and on about how this is the best guy on my big board. Why is he not getting drafted? This is a travesty. No, he just isn't that good. He holds onto the ball too long, takes way too many sacks, and is not anywhere near talented enough to justify all the extracurriculars that the team that drafts him will ultimately have to deal with. Like, for example, reporters asking Kevin Stefanski, the Browns head coach, on day 1 of rookie minicamp, why Dillon Gabriel took the first snap. I don't know, because Dillon Gabriel's a better quarterback, maybe? I don't know. And the thing that irks me about Shedeur Sanders is that he didn't accomplish anything. Curtis Rourke accomplished more than Shedeur Sanders did at Colorado. He did. Curtis Rourke accomplished more than Shedeur Sanders on the field. His team succeeded more than Colorado did. Football at Colorado, relative to the amount of hype they have gotten in the first 2 seasons under Deion, what have they done? What did they do in 2 seasons with Shedeur Sanders? Well, they won a combined 13 games. In the Pac-12, in Shedeur's first year at Colorado, they went 1-8. 1-8. Shedeur Sanders and Colorado lost to a Nebraska team that, as it turns out, was not very good at all. And if you remember, at the start of that game, Shedeur did what he often does when things don't go his way, which is throw his teammates under the bus. He threw a pick 6 at the start of the game. Oh, the receiver ran a bad route. It had nothing to do that you were throwing a sideline route within the shadow of your own goalpost. No, that had nothing to do with it. Just terrible, man. Terrible. He accomplished nothing. Got blown out in the Alamo Bowl. And all ESPN could do during that game was talk about, oh, but Shedeur Sanders is so talented. And, oh, look at Travis Hunter. BYU beat them 36-14. So it's no shock that nobody wanted to draft Shedeur Sanders. And honestly, I think that the Browns were forced to draft him by their owner. I really think they were. I don't think they wanted to draft him. I think that's why they picked Dillon Gabriel. So what? The Browns quarterback room right now, Kenny Pickett, Joe Flacco, Dillon Gabriel, and Shedeur Sanders. Ugh. But that's just the Browns. I mean, they have the albatross of Deshaun Watson's contract looming over their heads, which will go down as the single worst contract in sports ever in anything. Not just because Deshaun Watson sucks. Well, he sucks on and off the field. We'll just leave it at that. He's a terrible person, and he's a terrible quarterback. Like, pick a struggle, man. Be one or the other, but not both. The NFL will excuse you being a terrible person if you are good at your job. But if you are not good at your job, the NFL will not excuse it. Just look at what the Ravens did with Justin Tucker. as soon as that lawsuit comes out, they have the perfect excuse to cut him, even though he's the greatest kicker of all time. The NFL has a track record of doing that. If you have baggage, you got to at least be good at football. That obviously does not excuse anything that any player does off the field that's wrong. But the NFL and their teams have shown historically that they will turn a blind eye to it. Look at Ray Lewis. Perfect example. But going back to Shedeur Sanders, a fan who resides in Atlanta and is a self-proclaimed dedicated Colorado football fan going by John Doe, sued the NFL for $100 million because he claims he suffered emotional distress and trauma as a fan and consumer because he believes that the league conspired against Shedeur Sanders. This fan told The Independent, it was immediate frustration. This guy who was projected to be the first or second pick no later than the top 5, and to watch mediocre players be chosen before him, it was frustrating. And to have all the NFL owners, again, there is no evidence to support this, to have all the NFL owners collude and not draft him, it was, quote, mentally frustrating and debilitating. For them to believe that they can just do this and there's no recourse has to stop. That's so bad. That's so bad. The unnamed fan continues alleging that the NFL owners unfairly colluded to influence the draft process as it pertained to Sanders. This is my favorite part. And used racial discrimination to dictate where Sanders ended up getting drafted, which he says violates the Sherman Antitrust Act. If it was racial discrimination, then why did Cam Ward get drafted first overall? Maybe it's because Cam Ward is good. Now, he's playing for the Titans, and the Titans notoriously suck, regardless of who's on their roster. So, good luck to Cam Ward. But if it was racial discrimination, then why was Cam Ward drafted first overall? It has nothing to do with racial discrimination. It doesn't. It has to do with the fact that Shedeur Sanders sucks. And he's a hype merchant. And he's somebody who, again, in terms of team success, I'm not talking raw numbers. I'm not talking stat padding against bad teams because the Big 12 sucks at football. I'm talking about team accomplishments, career pedigree. Curtis Rourke accomplished more this year than Shedeur Sanders did at Colorado. He did. Colorado didn't make the college football playoff. Indiana did. Indiana did. Colorado, at the start of Shedeur's career there, beat up on teams that turned out to be awful. Like the upset, when it was an upset, they considered it an upset they had against TCU. TCU was horrible in 2023. Nebraska was horrible in 2020. Nebraska's always horrible. Their fans are great. Their football team is always bad. Dylan Raiola is nothing more than Walmart Patrick Mahomes, and I honestly hope that Mahomes gets a restraining order against him because it's becoming weird. The amount of things that Raiola does to imitate Patrick Mahomes. Dude, get your own personality. You don't want to be known as the guy who looks like Patrick Mahomes. You want to be known as Dylan Raiola. But Shedeur Sanders, this fan filing a $100 million lawsuit, I hope it's satire, but it's not. It's really funny that somebody thought it was racial discrimination and collusion that caused Shedeur Sanders to slide in the NFL draft. No. Shedeur Sanders is bad at quarterback. He will probably be, at best, a third stringer for the Browns. The only thing that I'm concerned about when it comes to Dillon Gabriel with Cleveland is his size. Dillon Gabriel's not very tall. And he's also left-handed, and the NFL has not been very kind to left-handed quarterbacks, which is also another reason I'm kind of concerned about Michael Penix in Atlanta. But Dillon Gabriel can sling it. Now, he couldn't sling it against Ohio State, but that's because Oregon was obviously, well, they weren't playing for wins or clicks. Were they playing for clicks? Maybe they were. But Dan Lanning's got bigger fish to fry now. But no. Shedeur Sanders is bad, and whoever the lawyer is that allowed that NFL fan to file a $100 million lawsuit, I respect the hustle, but also, man, you just had to lie to that guy's face and tell him he had a case. That's tough. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you. We were talking about postseason play in the Diamond Sports and the SEC tournament in particular on the softball side getting canceled. the SEC championship getting canceled. For college softball, it doesn't. Again, we were talking about A&M and Oklahoma, two of the national championship contenders. So the game itself not being played, as far as postseason implications, has very little impact. But I've said it before, and I will say it again, and I will not take any shame in saying it again. Shame on you, Greg Sankey, for not postponing the game to today. That is the final time I will say that. Actually, no, it's not. I'll probably say it again. But we're looking at the RPIs because postseason implications, obviously more than just computer metrics, but RPI matters, especially right now for Indiana softball because the selection show is today. And, oh man, it's tough. I can see a world where they get left out as maybe the first team out of the field because of Michigan doing what they did, upsetting the top two seeds en route to stealing the Big Ten title. They upset Oregon in the quarterfinal, beat Purdue in the semifinal, and then shut out UCLA in the championship. Indiana was very close to beating UCLA, could not get it done. But Michigan beat them, and Michigan is one spot ahead of Indiana in the softball RPI right now. That is what concerns me. Michigan 41st, Indiana 42nd. Michigan, a marginally worse strength of schedule. The team's essentially identical as far as overall strength of schedule goes. Michigan has a better record, given that they won more games in the Big Ten tournament, 38-19 versus Indiana's 33-18. Indiana played a slightly worse non-conference schedule, but both teams nearly identical in the non-conference. I think it might honestly come down to the fact that Michigan won the Big Ten tournament and Indiana lost in the quarterfinal. As tough as that is for Indiana on the diamond, I think they're a team that deserves to be in the field. But if they're left out, you will know why. Because Michigan ultimately did more in the conference tournament, which is where, again, there are bid stealers all the time. And good on Michigan because they are historically a very successful softball program in the Big Ten. Just wishing that if you're an Indiana fan that it did not come at Indiana's expense. But the selection show tonight at 7 on ESPN2, as is usually the case. Well, usually. It's a little bit inflated because of recent conference realignment, but Oklahoma and the other SEC teams, Texas A&M, Florida, Arkansas, LSU, Tennessee, the national championship contenders, by and large, are SEC teams. Florida State from the ACC, UCLA in the Big Ten. I don't know how in the world Oregon beat UCLA 2 out of 3, but they did. UCLA is the best team in the Big Ten in softball, one of the national championship contenders, a historically dominant softball program with 12 Women's College World Series titles and 13 national championships. Yeah, just accomplishments out the wazoo. Which is why it was so disappointing that Indiana fell just short. It was a thrilling game to call, though, and I will be calling more of those next year on the IU Sports Radio Network. So looking forward to that. It's well down the road, but something that definitely will keep spring 2026 very exciting because Indiana softball is a very fun group. One of the nation's best offenses this year just didn't quite have the same success in the pitcher's circle. As far as the baseball RPI goes, things are much less optimistic. Indiana, again, we've talked about it on this show throughout the semester. A propensity to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. That's been the name of the game for Indiana all season long. And I said they needed to probably win out from this weekend through the end of the year. That has not happened. Indiana lost to Purdue yesterday, left 7 runners on base in the first 5 innings, and Purdue taking advantage of their opportunities, capitalizing with runners in scoring position, playing good situational baseball, and then a back-breaking home run late from Purdue's best hitter, Logan Sutter, who has been fantastic for them as a JUCO transfer in his second year in the Big Ten. He's been Purdue's best offensive threat for the last 2 years. And he was due hitless until his final at-bat of yesterday's game in which he launched a back-breaking 2-run homer off the scoreboard. Purdue won that game 5-1. So Indiana and Purdue will play for the rubber match. They'll play for the series today at 4. That game's on Big Ten Network. Again, a very late start for a Sunday game. That's because it's on BTN. Makes sense since Purdue does not have to fly back. It's just a 2-hour drive to West Lafayette. I made it in an hour 40. I wouldn't tell Indiana State Police. I wasn't speeding, but they like to hand out tickets. So, but yeah, Purdue's very close. They'll play the game late. It'll be fun because it's college baseball. Both teams' bullpens are still pretty well set up. I'll put it that way. Neither team has had to use a ton of pitchers to get through these games. Indiana used just 2 yesterday after using 3 on Friday. Ryan Kraft went 7 innings. Cole Gilly and Pete Haas each went for 1. Yesterday it was Ben Grable and Darren Swanson, and Gavin Siebel, I should say, who worked that game for Indiana. So I would expect Cole Gilly to probably get the start today for Indiana. And from there, we'll see what happens. But Indiana had a lot of chances to win yesterday. Could not get it done. The Hoosiers now at 74th in the RPI, well off the bubble for the NCAA tournament at this point. Texas A&M is another really interesting case. A&M, the preseason number 1 overall team, they host Missouri in a weekend series. Missouri is not just bad. Missouri is the worst team in the SEC. But they're not just the worst team in the SEC. They're one of the worst teams in the country. 3-26 in Quad 1 games. And in SEC play, the Tigers were 0-24 before this weekend. They went to College Station. Missouri did. Facing the preseason number 1 Texas A&M Aggies, who had a very tough season relative to expectations. But they took on Texas A&M in College Station, beat them 9-6 on Friday, and locked up the series yesterday, winning 4-1. Missouri getting their first 2 SEC wins of the year in the second to last week of the regular season, beating Texas A&M in College Station to improve to a whopping 20 games under 500. But you know what? Good on Missouri. Because if you're going to have a terrible season, take somebody else down with you. And that's exactly what they did. So Texas A&M has fallen to 51st in the RPI, just 5 games over 500 at 27-22. For context, Indiana is 28-22. So if you're an Indiana baseball fan and you were thinking, man, this team's going to host a regional this year, well, it could always be worse. You could be Texas A&M, 5 games over 500. Dropping 16 spots in the RPI after losing back-to-back games to the SEC's worst team, which, again, was 0-24 in conference play before they came to your house and beat you twice. A&M is now on the NCAA tournament bubble at 51st in the RPI, just below certain powerhouses like East Tennessee State, Cal Poly, and Northeastern. Although Northeastern did win the CAA title in dominant fashion. But man, Texas A&M, it could always be worse, Indiana baseball fans. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday.